Welcome, friends, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate. It's so we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those setbacks and challenges that you faced or are facing at this moment, don't define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And nobody I know knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of this podcast, and my friend, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, we have reached the proverbial end of the line in our spring series. So I know, I'll say it one more time, we've got some good content ahead, and I know you're excited about it.
Absolutely. It's hard to believe that this is the last episode in the series, and very much looking forward to a good discussion.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to it too, as I know you are, because this is the 8th time that we've been joined by our friend Cheryl Farr, who is the founder and strategist for Signal Brand Innovation. And as I've dubbed her throughout this show, I actually gave her a superhero name. I called her Ms. Revelatory because of all that she brings to our discussion. So Cheryl, it's been, we get to see each other in meetings and strategy sessions all the time, but it's been a true joy and pleasure to share the microphones and the cameras with you. So thank you for all that you've brought to the table. And you're going to bring more as we go through this episode, I'm certain.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Warwick, and thank you, an extra thank you to you, Gary, for the cool superhero name.
Oh, thanks, and we'll keep it. I'll find other places to drop that in as I can. Okay, folks, for the final time in this series, we're going to level set everybody for what we're talking about. We're talking about our statistically valid trials to triumphs self-assessment, which offers those who take it details of a personal journey that is a bit like an endurance run. There are no sprints to the finish line or ways to cut the track. You've got to do the hard work of moving through each stage of the journey from your personal "you are here" mark on the map. And you must do it at the speed that's right for you, what you've been through and where you're going. Now, I've said this. This is now the 8th time I'm going to say this. It's not a competition. Everyone has their own clock. So because it's the 8th time I've said it, I'll say this. So please, 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 please don't feel the pressure to break the tape first. We've extended the running metaphor as an easy way to visualize the Trials to Triumphs roadmap and to understand its 6 unique starting points. This week, we're going to look back over all the profiles we've discussed, as well as the creation of the assessment, to offer what we hope is a robust summary of the series. Warwick, the gentleman from Wisconsin, yields the floor to the gentleman from Maryland via Australia.
Thank you so much. So Cheryl, let's kind of just level set us. Let's revisit where we started in our discussion of the Trial to Triumph assessment of more than 11,000 people completed this assessment. What are some things, as we begin our discussion, that we should keep in mind? Well,
Warwick, that's a really great question. We've invested 5 years in building this study, which I look back at it and I can't believe it's been that long that we've been on this journey. This assessment, one of the things that David and Heather Lucas, our researchers from Dark Horse Insight, who helped us to field and create this study, pointed out on episode 1 was the fact that very few assessments out there in the world are statistically validated like this, that actually give you outputs that are extremely valuable and actionable to your life, right? I mean, we can all take quizzes online that tell us whether we're an otter or a beaver, right? As we like to say. But this is actually an extremely valid tool and valuable tool to let you know where you are as you emerge from a crucible and on your journey to a life of significance and what you need to do. The path is really proven and actionable, and that's really valuable. I think that I'm so excited by how this body of data and knowledge can be so useful for people and transformative for their lives, for people who have experienced a crucible and want to move forward from it. It's also important to remember that it's not a personality profile, right? It is one of the findings that was really important was that it is also not tied to demographics. So it's not about what personality you are, and it's not about, it's not demographically aligned. It doesn't matter how old you are or what gender you are or what your zip code is. It's irrelevant. This is a snapshot of a moment in time in your life. It's a you are here point on a map. How do you see the world and your place in it at this specific point in time? It's a signifier of how you've processed the trials and traumas and losses and failures you've been through and what you need to do to move forward or continue moving forward or start to move forward from there. The last thing I'll point out is there are 6 identifiable starting points on the map. However, everyone's journey is unique. Everyone goes at their own pace. There's no right or wrong answer. And as Gary likes to say, there's no pressure to compare yourself to anyone else or to beat them to the finish line. We all move. The journeys are followable, but that we follow them in our own way, at our own pace, in our own movements. And that's really important. 6 starting points and 1,000,000 journeys forward.
So well said, Cheryl. As I reflect on what you've said and David and Heather, and, a lot of this was in the first episode that we discussed this, what, was amazing to me was a couple things. One was that they said when they did peer review research into other studies, their assessment was nobody's really done an assessment of how do you go from your worst day, your crucible, to a life of significance, to triumph. I mean, what are the steps? What are the paths that you can, the tracks, if you will? And so that was amazing. And then the second thing, as you said, people who do research, they typically assume there are going to be differences in demographics, age, gender, time in life. And when there wasn't, they just kept digging. It's like, maybe we missed something. They kept digging and digging and digging, and they couldn't find it. That sort of amazed them. So those two things that were sort of breaking fresh ground, and that these results didn't really change with demographics. As we'll get into more, it's really a mindset issue. But just talk about those two things, that that this is, charting new territory, and it really doesn't differ with demographics, and how surprising that is, compared to other research.
Yeah, well, that first issue, Warwick, what you're saying about how, no one had ever really done this body of work before, and we didn't really know that, right? This is part of our reason for being. This is our reason for being at Beyond the Crucible, to really help people move from their not be defined by their worst days, to help people not be defined by their worst days, and to move forward and from their crucibles and really be able to bounce forward to a life of significance. And we asked ourselves, what if there was a real journey here that we could chart and help people chart? And we looked and said, has anybody else done this kind of work? And nobody really had. And that was just really profound for us, right? That was really exciting because we realized we could chart new territory. But whenever you go into a research study like this, you kind of don't know what you're going to find, right? It could have been, well, there's no real roadmap here, or it could be demographic based. To your second point, it is almost unheard of for movements like this to be not demographically based. But I think there's a reason for that. So there are no demographic alignments here. It doesn't matter, as we've said, how rich you are or how poor you are. None of those things matter. And I think because crucibles are the great equalizer, right? And you learned this the very first time you told your story, right? When you stood up at church and told your story, and you thought, who can relate to my crucible of being a failed media mogul. But in reality, so many people related to that because I think, as I said, crucibles are the great equalizer. At the end of the day, nothing can save you from having to process your emotions and cast a new vision and move toward that vision, turn that vision into reality. The journey is the same for all of us. And we all have the opportunity, no matter what our life circumstances, to turn trial into triumph. And that's so exciting.
So Cheryl, let's do a recap of each of the 6 profiles and each of the 6 starting points.
Absolutely, Warwick. And of course, we've done an episode dedicated to each one of these, but it's worth recapping and talking about all of them. We'll start where we did, which was with the end in mind and the profile we call hitting your stride. This is where we all want to be. This is somebody who has had a crucible and has been able to process their emotions around it, cast a new strong vision for their life, and move toward reality. Right? They've experienced breakthroughs. They're not being held back by what's happened to them at all. They have a strong vision of what significance looks like, and they're acting on it. Doesn't mean they don't hit roadblocks, but they know how to move around those roadblocks. They know how to keep moving forward. And that's a really exciting place to be. Okay? And that's where we're all working toward on the journey from trial to triumph. When we step into our second profile, which we call stuck on the starting line, this is someone who's being held back from starting the race at all by the fallout from their crucible. It doesn't matter whether that crucible was a week ago, a year ago, or 20 years ago. They are dealing with the hurt and anger from it. They have not been able to let go of that yet, and they know they're being held back by it. And they, as a result of being held back, as I've said throughout the series, if you're looking in the rearview mirror, you can't look forward. And the data shows that, right? If you're held back by your anger and your sadness or your hurt, they're very low on being able to articulate a new vision for life and turn that vision into reality. Before they can get going, moving forward, they have to go back and process those emotions and let go of that pain and sadness and anger. Next is the profile we'll call running in place. The runner in place is someone who has accepted their crucible as part of their life. They recognize that they've been through it, and they're not really angry or hurt by it anymore. They just haven't hit the restart button yet. They've got no real vision for life. They're kind of just going through the motions and surviving. They have to figure out a way to cast a new vision. They might still be living in a path of an old vision, even though their life has changed and they've changed. So they need help taking small steps to a new vision, one that isn't defined by what happened in the past, but defines a new future that they can get really excited about. The next profile we'll talk about is afraid to trip. The afraid to trip person has also accepted their crucible as part of their life and has largely processed through it. What makes them different than the runner in place is that they have a strong vision for a new personal future. They've actually cast a new vision, but they're really cautious about moving ahead and turning it into reality. They might feel what we call once bitten, twice shy, right? They need the safety, the encouragement, and the support to move beyond their fear of failure and to start running that race toward that new vision and that new future. Next, we'll talk about on a different track. These are the 28% of people who don't acknowledge that they've had a crucible at all. Yet they're kind of in a stuck state. They're living kind of a lukewarm life due to some unacknowledged or veiled crucible, right? One of the things we learned from the research is that we've all experienced crucibles. None of us have been able to live life unscathed. Something has happened to us, whether it's not making the Little League team or something more terrible than that, that has fundamentally changed the trajectory of our lives. But there are 28% of us who haven't quite acknowledge that. But yet there is this sadness or discontent around a vision left behind. It could be a dream that's lost in the process of settling down, or a special talent or passion that just was left behind because life gets busy, right? Even if we don't acknowledge these as major moments of trauma or loss, these veiled crucibles are significant points of trajectory shift that have left us feeling like something is missing. They've kind of left a hole inside because something's unacknowledged or unreconciled, either very practically or emotionally. This person might be asking themselves, is this all there is? They need to be able to recognize that veiled or unacknowledged crucible as a real crucible moment, resurrect the seeds of that long-held vision or dream, hone it for today, right? How does it fit in their lives today? And craft a plan to turn it into reality. That may not be blowing up your whole life, but it may mean tapping into something that you've left behind to find that significance that feels like it's been missing. And lastly, we'll talk about in a mad dash, right? This is somebody who is really a high performer, who has had a crucible and they've moved on. They're moving toward a vision. They're turning it into reality. Here's the problem. They've leapt right over the processing phase. They acknowledge their crucible and they acknowledge that they're angry about it, right? They're still holding on to hurt and anger. On the outside, they might look very successful, but inside they have this niggling feeling they're held back in some way. And as I've said, you can't look in the rear view mirror and look forward at the same time. So they're running ahead, but it's almost like they have a weight tied around their waist, or they're running through sand, right? Eventually, no matter how far you push down that anger, it's going to come roaring back up. You cannot, none of us get a get out of jail free card when it comes to processing our emotions. If we don't deal with them, they will come up and force us eventually. We've got to bounce back, process. Then we have the opportunity to actually move toward a vision that isn't anchored in anger, but is anchored in joy, excitement, and significance.
Folks, is there any doubt why I refer to Cheryl as Ms. Revelatory? That is, I mean, we have talked, about ways in which we can use this content for other things. And I'm telling you, when I was listening to you explain all that, Cheryl, I'm thinking college course. I mean, truly, truly insightful stuff. And it was surprising stuff for us too, as the ones who planned this series, because while we were doing it, and we didn't know it, when we did episode 1, we had no idea that we were going to end at episode 8, knowing this to be true and summarizing all this. But here's the truth that we discovered. And that's that, Warwick, you went through a period, some were longer than others, of each of the profiles that Cheryl just discussed. So I have to ask you, it surprised me. I think it surprised Cheryl. Did it surprise you?
It sure did, Gary. So we started discussing these profiles, starting with hitting your stride. And it's like, well, yeah, I think I'm hitting my stride. That makes sense, with the Beyond the Crucible brand, this podcast, with my book, Crucible Leadership, Embrace Your Trials to Lead a Life of Significance, my speaking. So, yeah. But what was kind of interesting, we started going through the profiles one by one, and I kept sort of sticking my hand up saying, well, yeah, I was in that one. And it was like, well, I wonder how many of these, will happen. So as we prep for the podcast, I said, well, I think this might fit. What do you think? And both Cheryl and you, Gary, said, yeah, I think it fits. So just to kind of briefly recap my, profile journey, if you will. So I just mentioned, yes, I like to think I'm hitting my stride now. And I definitely feel like I'm, living a life of significance, a life on purpose, dedicated to serving others, super excited about what we're doing and excited about things that we will be doing. Even when you're hitting your stride, there's always more to do. There's more fun and excitement around the corner and, obviously more challenges, but so definitely feel like that's where I am. But there certainly was a stuck at the starting line moment. And that happened to me after my $2.25 billion takeover of my family's 150-year-old company failed. That was a pretty challenging time. I definitely felt very stuck. What do I do now? Then I had at least the next profile, I should say. The next profile we discussed was running in place. And certainly in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was working for an aviation services company in Maryland. I was getting great performance reviews, but I felt like I was surviving and not thriving. Life was okay, but I kind of really wasn't making any headway, at least not in the big picture of life. Then I certainly had an afraid to trip moment in 2008. As folks will know, I gave a talk in church. And somehow people related to my story of growing up in this large family media business and then it falling out of family control under my watch, despite there being no other media moguls that I know of in the audience. Somehow people could relate to it, which still amazes me to this day. And so I began to write my book, Crucible Leadership. But it wasn't easy. I made progress, but it was glacial. There was a lot of pain, a lot of fear involved. People kind of mock me in Australia for writing about this and say, yeah, that's the guy that ruined my life, like reporters for the Sydney Morning Herald. People may think that reporters are biased, but when you've directly done something that's significantly adversely affected their life and career, they have every reason not to be happy with the actions you took. And so I completely understand why they're not always that pro me, which I get it. So yes, that was a challenge. I was certainly pretty fearful about moving forward. And I also had an on a different track moment. That's going back a bit in growing up in my family's media business. My life was one of duty and obligation. The idea that I could live my own vision seemed to be self-centered and just abhorrent, really. My duty was to live this vision, which wasn't really even my dad's vision, who was probably more of a philosopher, if you will. It would have been a great philosophy professor in university. It was really the vision of my great-great-grandfather, John Fairfax, a noble vision, but it really wasn't my vision. So I was living my whole life on a different track, somebody else's vision. And even though I don't think I'm a mad dasher by personality, I'm a reflective person, I actually had a mad dash moment or period, which is a bit of an out-of-body experience for me. So in the months leading up to the takeover in 1987, my dad had died in early 87. Stock price of the company started rocketing up. The market felt the company was in play. I felt the company wasn't being managed well or run along the ideals of the founder. So there was a just mad dash to get, a takeover plan together. Then we launched it in August 1987. Then there was a mad dash to sort of close out the takeover and take control, which we did by December 1990. And then for the months and years from then until the company went into receivership, into bankruptcy in late 1990, there was also a mad dash of refinancing. In fact, there was one time in which we just met with investment bankers in New York, flew back to Australia, which is like a 20-hour plus experience. And then, within 6+ hours later, we got on a plane and went right back to New York because there were more meetings we needed. I mean, talk about a mad dash. That was like, crazy stuff. Because I wanted to do everything I could to keep the company afloat. So it actually was not my intention to live through each profile, but I did. And I think one of the things that my story shows is that our trial to triumph journey is not linear. We can go through crucibles. We can hit different profiles. Not everybody will hit every profile. And this isn't an award that you have to hit every profile. You don't get a trophy if you hit each one. So it's not the goal. Don't copy me. Try and avoid hitting every profile. But as I look back on the chronology of it, if you look at the profiles and where I was in my time of life, I started out on a different track. Then I went to a mad dash. Then I got stuck on the starting line. Then I was running in place. After that, I was afraid to trip before finally hitting my stride. So that's the chronological series of profiles that I hit on my journey from, I guess, originally on a different track to finally hitting my stride. So, long time coming, but there you go. It was quite the journey, and kind of amazed me that I hit every profile. I mean, go figure.
And the thing that comes to mind when you say that, when you put them all together like that, if you've ever been to a minor league baseball game, they do this thing with the fans they call the dizzy bat race, where someone puts their head on a bat and they run around in a circle, and then they try to run down the field and they fall down. And it's I imagine, right? There were times where you felt out of sorts, out of your elements. That's part of the journey back, because there are going to be times that you're going to be unsure as you're going through. And Cheryl, I want to ask you a question off of what Warwick said, because he went through all 6 profiles. Not everybody will do that, but it's not uncommon, is it, for people to go through several of these as they are coming back from their crucible. This is not sort of you get one profile and then the next thing is you're hitting your stride. It's a process for sure, right?
It's a process for sure. And when I hear, when we started this, we didn't realize that Warwick would hit every profile, and he mapped them out so beautifully. But it's no wonder that this was his vision, right? That beyond the crucible is Warwick's vision, and his life of significance. But I think one thing that's really interesting is, I mentioned this earlier, there are 6 starting points in a million journeys, right? Because certainly it's possible to start on one of these profiles and move directly toward a life of significance. But that doesn't recognize, that's a simplistic view. That doesn't recognize that, many of us have been through multiple crucibles. And also, we actually may have to even peel the onion on the crucibles that we've been through. We may reach a certain point and then have to sort of step back a little bit and before we can move forward. So sometimes moving forward may mean that you go from stuck on the starting line to afraid to trip. For that person, it's still moving forward, right? Because stuck on the starting line is, I haven't processed my crucible. Afraid to trip, I've processed it, but I'm still not sure how to move forward. Now, that doesn't mean everyone stuck on the starting line is going to get to afraid to trip. It doesn't. But it's a perfectly good progression if that's how your journey moves. One of the things I think is so interesting about Warwick's journey is that, as he articulated it, he started as on a different track, right? Then where he didn't even acknowledge that what he had been through as part of his family story was a crucible. Then he went to In a Mad Dash, right? Both profiles that require you to sort of step back, acknowledge your crucible, and process it. And when he didn't do that, boom, he got hit hard, and then he was stuck on the starting line, right? In other words, great example, great evidence that if you don't go back and realize what you've been through, it's going to happen to you eventually.
Right.
And so that's why I think it's really interesting to see that even if you're moving from profile to profile, those are moments of progression, right? Maybe you can't even think about a new vision until you've processed that crucible that you've been through. And I think, Warwick, your crucible was so substantial your journey forward required you to unpack and deal with layers of that crucible. I think that the other thing is you can be hitting your stride along the journey and then get to a moment where you're ready to move forward. Think about it as running, right? I might start on the starting line, and just to run half a mile a day, right, is a huge achievement. And I can be hitting my stride at half a mile a day. Well, in a year, that might be running in place. And now I've got to set a new goal. And I think, Warwick, when I think about your journey in terms of, say, the aviation services company, when you took that role, that was a huge step forward in saying, look, I can add value. I cannot screw up. I can bring a lot to the table. People can respect what I offer. I can contribute. But then 6 years later, that became a running in place moment. That's where you said, wait, maybe I'm playing small. Maybe there's something else for me out there. But I would say that there was a big period there where you were hitting your stride, and that's what your stride needed to look like at the time. Then, as you were ready to grow forward, then there was another new starting point that you had to use as another trajectory forward. Those are all good things. And so when as our listeners think about how they move from trials to triumphs, you might find a really clean journey from trial to triumph, or you might find milestones throughout life. And I think all of that is good news. And so at any point in time, this trials to triumphs journey can give us a moment of self-reflection to say, where am I at? Is this where I want to be? And if not, what do I need to do to move forward? And I think that's really an exciting opportunity.
And that's where, right, your language, Cheryl, of it's a snapshot, not a profile per se, not a personality profile, right? It's a snapshot of where you are along your journey on the roadmap from trials to triumphs. And it's fantastic that we have such a great illustration as Warwick here, who's been through that. And all of those moments that he talked about were indeed snapshots of what he was going through. And what's interesting about it, and the snapshot metaphor is good, because how many times do we forget the places we've been till we go in a drawer and we find the old snapshots that are and we're like, oh, look at that. That's where we were. That's part, I think, of what you've gone through is revisiting those snapshots because of this series. And I hope that same experience transfers to the viewers and listeners as they, see where they are on the map right now, their snapshot, and they chart their course back, trying to get hitting your stride.
Well, I think that one of the things that the Trials to Triumph roadmap and the self-assessment can do is give people the gift of self-reflection and the opportunity to really say, okay, here's my result. Why did I get this result? What's going on that I need to unpack, right? And what's working, what's not working. And we know what do I need to do to move forward.
As I reflect on what you're saying, Cheryl and Gary, and my own journey, what's interesting is it wasn't a linear journey from on a different track to hitting your stride. I'd somehow managed to, hit every profile. But even though I hit them, I was still moving forward in some sense. So, when I was at this running in place moment at the aviation services company, as you rightly said, Cheryl, that was a big step, because at the time in 96, when I started working there, before then I felt like, gosh, whatever I, involved with, I just screw up. I mean, my self-esteem, despite the fact of having an undergrad degree from Oxford, worked on Wall Street and having a Harvard MBA, you would think that would give you some modicum of self-esteem. I've achieved something. But because of what happened, that was all like eradicated. My self-esteem, that was meaningless. It just degrees on a piece of paper. I mean, who cares, So that was huge. But then when I got to that place and I felt like, I sort of had this moment of self-reflection and prayer. And I felt like from my paradigm, God was telling me, Warwick, you are playing small, nothing wrong with what you're doing, but you've got gifts and abilities you are not using. And from my faith paradigm, that's a problem. God gives us skills and abilities for a reason, from my perspective, to help other people, to serve a higher purpose, whatever that means to you. So yeah, that kind of hits, squarely, my, values and, faith paradigm. So that was huge. And then, yes, in a sense, I was in an afraid to trip moment. But even though it was really painful writing my book, I couldn't write more than 2 or 3 hours a day. Because imagine writing about your worst moments and biggest cataclysmic mistakes and pain. It's not easy. But the progress might have been glacial. It took years to write, but I was moving forward. It took about baby steps. It was very painful baby step. But I guess my point is to write each of these profiles, they serve me in a way. I found a way to move forward. And I'd say, even when you're hitting your stride, it's not always Disneyland. And even if you don't hit a major crucible, sometimes, a bit like an earthquake, there can be aftershocks. Sometimes you have processed your crucible, but it might be triggered by a memory. It doesn't mean you're on the floor for weeks or months, but there'll be a moment, a little, twinge of pain. You'll recognize, that wound may have healed, but there's still a scar. It's not holding me back. I processed it, but maybe there's an article in Australia or a cartoon or something. It's like, oh, really? And, I will feel bad about it for, a few hours a day. And then, okay, I process it, think about it, pray about it, discuss it, and I move forward. So even when you're hitting a stride, you may have processed your crucibles. There can be new crucibles. There can be aftershocks. So, there's sort of some nuance to this. But yeah, it was sort of an interesting journey. But throughout it all, I felt like I was moving forward, which, was sort of encouraging as I look back.
Yeah. And that's a good segue, as always, Warwick. You're such a good seguer without even knowing you're a good seguer. You just say something and it's like a perfect segue, because we're going to talk about 3 big takeaways in content from what we talked about during this series. And the way that we kind of found our way to them is, what are the things we said the most often? All right. There are certain things that we said a lot in this series. And if you say them a lot over the course of 7 episodes, now 7.5-ish, there's a reason why. Those are important concepts that you're talking about. And I think the phrase that we may have mentioned most of all in these episodes is knowledge is power. I think every episode, Cheryl at least introduced the subject, and then Warwick, you then talked about it after that. The reality is that to get from trials to triumphs, you have to understand the trials, process the emotions of them, then apply the wisdom they taught you to keep navigating your way to a life of significance. So I'm going to toss this question to both of you, and that's this. Why is knowledge, understanding what your crucible taught you about yourself, such a meaningful milestone in moving from trials to triumphs, no matter where you find yourself on the roadmap?
Well, I think, Gary, knowledge is power because it allows you to understand where you are. It gives you that gift of self-reflection, first of all, right? Is to stop and say, how am I different, right? How do we define a crucible? A crucible is a moment, a trauma or loss that is so significant that it has changed the trajectory of our life somehow. It gives us knowledge is power because it gives us the opportunity to say, okay, how has my life been changed? How have I changed, right? What has this done for me? What new path am I on? How have I been refined? Hence the crucible, right? How have I been refined by the fires I've walked through? And I think knowledge is also power in terms of where I am on this map, in terms of what am I going through right now? What have I processed and what haven't I? What have I re-envisioned and what haven't I yet? If you're lost, the first thing you do is you've got to locate yourself. If you're physically lost, say you're walking around New York City and you're physically lost, the first thing you got to do is figure out where you're at before you can figure out where you can go next. Same thing here. You got to figure out where you're at before you know where to go next.
One of the things I think about with this phrase, knowledge is power, is that we all have choice. We often in life come to roadblocks or crucibles, and we typically don't have a choice about what happened to us, whether it's a physical crucible or various other kind of crucibles. Often you can't undo what's being done, but you can choose how you react to it. You can decide to learn the lessons from your crucible. You can make a choice to not let your worst day define you. So as you're learning about what profile you're at, it's easy to be downcast and say, gosh, I'm stuck at the starting line, or I'm in a mad dash, or running in place. That doesn't sound fun. But the first step towards getting out of that and, living a life of significance, hitting your stride is that knowledge. And really what you do have is choice to decide, what am I going to do with this information? Am I going to use this to help me move forward? It may not happen overnight, but, that choice can really enable you to move forward. May not happen at 100 miles an hour, but moving forward is huge. So choice is really the thing that really comes to mind when I think about this concept of knowledge is power.
The second thing that we said an awful lot, and I actually combined two things we said an awful lot into one point here, and that's this. One small step is all it takes to get the flywheel of significance turning. Again, talk about how one small step can often feel like it's too small, not enough to truly get down the road from trials to triumphs. But why is there not only power, but wisdom in looking at this journey one baby step at a time?
Wow. I think this is something that we wouldn't have even been able to realize at the beginning of this series as fully as we did, as we discussed it. And, we discussed Warwick's story throughout the series. We discussed the 18 podcast guests throughout the series. And what we saw repeatedly was that to get moving on their journey, once people sort of understood what they were going through, that one small step was all they needed to do to start moving forward. That more often than not, in fact, I'm not sure there are any stories where anyone could have envisioned where they ended up, right? They didn't envision the horizon. They visioned the next doorway, right? And their vision started small. Robert Miller started with going on Craigslist and saying, gosh, I want to play music again. I'm going to go find other people who want to play music like I do. And lo and behold, here he is now with a global podcast and hit records and all of these things he couldn't have imagined. It's really exciting when you look at that, what can come as the engine starts moving and then starts to speed up as doors start to open once you start moving. Even when the vision was bigger, like Nancy Volpe Berenger, who at, I think, the age of 64, went back to fashion school at Drexel University. She couldn't have imagined ending up on Project Runway and designing fashion for differently abled people and becoming such a big brand and doing something so visible and so impactful and so unique. She wouldn't have even imagined that on her radar. So I think that's really exciting that you don't have to have a giant vision. And another place where you shouldn't compare yourself to other people, right? You don't have to see 3 or 5 years or even 1 year down the line. All you have to do is step 5 inches ahead. And it's wild how that wheel starts to move.
I think with a lot of us, rather than thinking about 5 or 10 years down the track, it's like, what next small step can I make? And I know for me, in one of the examples that we shared, it was a small step in one way to speak in church, although it felt a little terrifying at the time. But when I spoke and people seemed to resonate with what I said, which was incredible about the stories I shared and lessons learned, I got this idea, I think there's a book here. So rather than like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I wrote like a brief outline. And then I said, you know what? I'm just going to start writing. I had a vague idea of how it would work, some themes from my life and other family members, some historical leaders, maybe some faith and inspirational. In fact, when I really think back on it, when I started writing that first chapter, I might not even had that. I just started writing about my story. I thought, I'm writing about crucibles, but I can think of some folks in history and some faith leaders. It just kind of wrote itself. But I didn't have this 100-page manual about how I'm going to write the book. I had an idea that was going to be lessons learned, anchored by my story. I just started writing one chapter, one page at a time. And it took years, but it wrote itself. But, so it was a massive undertaking, but it started with one small step. So one of the mantras, if you will, of phrases I always say to myself in anything in life is, what do I feel like within my gut is the next right step? Being a person of faith, I don't, pray about every single solitary thing in my life, but if it's big, I'll think to myself and pray, well, Lord, what is that next step? And invariably, I've always had this sense of inner peace of like, okay, I feel like this is the next right step. I may not quite know where it's all going to lead, but this feels right to me now. And depending on the circumstances, I may well ask, advice, maybe folks on the team, my wife, Gail, or other friends, depends on the situation. But I've always felt like just praying and just reflecting on what is that next right step. Listen to your gut, listen to intuition, and it will tend to serve you well.
And that's when you do that, right? It gives you a little hope, doesn't it? Yeah, and that's one of the things that has struck me for the 5 years we've been doing this is you coined the phrase that at Beyond the Crucible we are dealers in hope, and one of the third point that is, I think, a big takeaway from this series is every profile, except maybe for hitting your stride, where hope is sort of baked into it, right? You're hitting your stride, so you're hopeful. But every other profile that we've talked about, one of the questions you asked of Cheryl in every episode, Warwick, was, where does the person with fill in the name of the profile find hope? Because this can be something that can knock them off balance a little bit. So I'm going to ask you both. There's a lot of information that's in the assessment that people have taken. They might feel overwhelmed or confused or a bit downcast and disappointed. What hope can they have to take away from these 8 weeks that we've spent together?
That's a great question, Gary. I see so much hope and so much opportunity in this Trials to Triumphs roadmap, because it is an opportunity to look forward, to stop. And so many of these profiles are anchored in what we've come from and what we're able to, there's so much hope. What we're able to do is help by looking at these profiles. We can take that lens and shift it from backward looking to forward looking, right? And even if we're not ready to move ahead, to know where we're at, to take inventory, to have the gift of self-reflection, and to really assess, do I need help from somebody else to move forward? Am I ready to do it on my own? Am I not quite ready yet, but I'm going to ask myself that question in a month, right? What am I going to do to move forward and to start orienting toward what our crucible, not just what it did to us, but what it can do for us. Warwick said so well earlier, right? We can't control what's happened to us. We can't change it, but we can use it as an opportunity to know ourselves better, to take hard-won wisdom and experience and learning to move forward in a way that we would not have been able to do if we didn't have that experience. And there's so much hope and opportunity in that for each of us, no matter what that crucible has looked like.
So well said, Cheryl. As I think about this assessment and our discussion, it really is true that knowledge is power. Knowing where you're at does indeed give you both hope and power. And it's about choice. It's all about mindset. You can get the results and say, I can't believe it. I'm stuck at the starting line. I haven't even begun the race. I think when you understand where you're at, you do have a choice. You can choose to move forward. You can say, okay, this isn't fun, but how can I use this crucible? How can I use this information to figure out, maybe it's going to take a while to hitting my stride, but I know now what it looks like. Let me see if I can plan maybe a roadmap or just even first few baby steps. But there's no question in my mind that knowing where you're at is the first step to progress and to living your best life, and indeed to living a joyful life, a life of significance, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. So knowing where you're at, it is a gift. It can be something to actually celebrate, not cringe from, believe it or not.
It's funny. This is the moment in episodes where we have guests where I'll say it's getting, that sound you heard is the captain turning on the fasten seatbelt sign. We've begun our descent. It's almost time to land the plane. But before I do, then I ask the guest to say how they can find out more, how listeners can find out more about them on the internet. I guess I'll ask myself that to say, folks, you can find out more about the assessment by going to beyondthecrucible.com and taking it. Can't miss it. There's a highlighted box at the top of the page where you can take the assessment. You'll get your results right away. But more than that, when you get your results, you'll also get some resources that can help you as you navigate your way through wherever you are at now to hitting your stride. You'll get some podcast episodes, some of the ones that we talked about here that deal with guests who are at some point we're in the same profile that you get on the assessment. There are also resources like Warwick's book, Crucible Leadership, Embrace Your Trials to Lead a Life of Significance. There's other blogs, those kinds of things. They're all available at the website. So go to beyondthecrucible.com, take the assessment, look at your results, and begin this journey. Listen to the previous episodes again, especially the one that pertains to whatever your result is. And that will help you as you begin to navigate your way back. Then in a show with a guest, I will then pause and ask the guest a final question. So I will pose a final question to you guys, and that's this. What's one thing from both of you? What's one thing you hope that folks who have watched and listened to every episode of this series, what's one thing you hope they take away from this experience?
The one thing that I hope people take away from this experience is that they see their profile as an opportunity to chart a course forward and take the first step toward triumph. To use that as an opportunity to determine what they need to do to move forward, that this is positive, that it's exciting, that it is a way to orient yourself toward a new day, and not be bogged down by what's gone in the past, what's gone on in the past, but to be honest with yourself and determine what steps you need and want to take to move forward, to really understand, is there an opportunity to have a third party help you process unresolved emotions, have somebody help you and come alongside you to cast a new vision for your life? Or it could even be acknowledging an unresolved crucible for those on a different track to go, you know what? My crucibles might not have been as bad as somebody else's, but that doesn't mean they're not real, right? Warwick, I've heard you say, your own worst day is your own worst day.
Exactly.
And I think that this is, that I hope that the people see this as an opportunity to go somewhere new, exciting, and significant.
Well said. I think when the "you are here" moment is not hitting your stride, it can feel disappointing. You can feel like, gosh, maybe I failed. How come I'm not where I feel like I should be? But the important thing to realize is that a profile that you might receive in this assessment, it's a moment in time. It is not your legacy. Any given profile is not your legacy. It's a moment in time, and it's not the end of your story. The reason we built this assessment is we want to help give you tools and information and hopefully some inspiration to get to where you really want to get to a vision that's in line with your values and beliefs, something that makes the world a better place in some sense, to lead a life of significance, as we say, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. So when you get the information from your profile, especially if it's not hitting your stride, it's not the end of your story. There is a path forward. We have attempted to give you some information and tools to help you get to the next step in your journey. And so realize that this is just a moment in time. It's not a race. As Cheryl rightly said, you might feel guilty about complaining about your crucible, saying, gosh, what I've been through is not nearly as bad as my friend or my family member or loved one. Again, it's not a competition. Your worst day is your worst day. So don't feel guilty about feeling bad, if some of you might, or don't feel like, gosh, my crucible is so bad. As one of our guests on the podcast said, the pit is bottomless. It can only get worse. It's easy to have that perspective, but you could listen to almost any one of the 120 plus guests we've had on the podcast. They've come back from the most unimaginable, incredibly painful crucibles to live a joy-filled life of significance. It is possible. If they can do it, I think we all can do it. So your worst day is not the end of your story. Your "you are here" moment is also not the end of your story. Even if it's hitting your stride, there's more exciting territory to conquer. There's more exciting steps in your vision. Your vision may grow, maybe even modify. So your "you are here" moment is not the end of your story. There is a joy-filled life awaiting you. Just learn the lessons, move forward, and it's certainly possible.
Gary, I know you asked for one, but can I do two? And I'd like, I have a second one.
You may, absolutely.
I also would like to encourage people to not be intimidated by the concept of casting a new vision. I think one of the things we've seen is that visions can be seeds, right? That a vision could be a feeling, right? It doesn't have to be, I'm going to change the world out of the gate. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be specific. It doesn't have to be way down the horizon. That a vision can be, I want to feel different, or I'm feeling different, or I want to do something new and I'm not sure what that is. One of the things that we saw, I know that concept can be really intimidating for a lot of people, but we've seen this with the flywheel concept, that small visions can become big visions. We've also seen that a lot of our guests have found the seeds of their vision in their crucible. Warwick being patient number one, right? Somebody who's really dedicated his life to helping people bounce forward from their own crucible moments. We've seen that people taking those crucibles and turn them into a platform or a way of helping others to experience their crucibles in a new way, or whatever that looks like. And I think that that's so exciting. So I just want to say that, because I think that it can be easy to be intimidated by, but I have no idea what to do next. That does not have to be an intimidating idea. Just start moving.
I've been in the communications business long enough, folks, to know a couple of things. One, I repeat myself a lot. I say this at the end of every episode, but it's because it's true. But I know when the last words have been spoken on a subject, and Cheryl Farr, also known as Ms. Revelatory, has just spoken it to us. But here's the good news, folks. It's the last word on this episode and the last word on the 8 episodes contained in this series, but it's not going to be the last word that you'll hear from us about this subject. Next week, we will have another new episode, which will be more of the traditional stuff that you've come to expect from us. But stay tuned, because we have plans still in progress for how we're going to take the content, take the learnings, the revelations that came from this assessment, and we're going to continue to sprinkle that out there so you can truly be equipped, truly be armed to not let your worst day define you, and to find your path to hitting your stride that eventually will take you to a life of significance. If you enjoyed this episode, learned something from it, we invite you to engage more deeply with those of us at Beyond the Crucible. Visit our website, beyondthecrucible.com, to explore a plethora of offerings to help you transform what's been broken into breakthrough. A great place to start? Our free online assessment, which will help you pinpoint where you are on your journey beyond your crucible and to chart a course forward. See you next week.